Surfcast Podcast, and we got a bit of a special occasion, special episode today because we're going to do something we swore up and down we would never do on the podcast, and that's going to be talking about spots. Specifically, some of our spots. We might piss some people off, depending what we, if we might trigger someone and be like, oh man, that's my spot too, or whatever the case may be, but we'll get to why. You'll see as you follow along. So rather than take the heat to start with, I think I'm going to throw it over to you, Jerry. Let you divulge spot number one in today's episode.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's time. I think that, this is pretty well accepted in the surf community now. And no, we're just kidding. We would never, ever do this in a million years. There will never be any spots. We're not doing that at all. I hope some of you are having a heart attack. Not really, but, also kind of. We would never, ever, ever do that. Do not send us messages about spots. Do not even send us messages about your spots. We don't even want to know. But we thought maybe that would get you your adrenaline pumping today, get you woke right up, and get you right into the podcast.
Get your attention.
For the record, if you found that annoying, you can blame me because that was my idea. We won't. I'll take some ownership of that over Toby, so Toby doesn't have to have as much hate mail as me. So
yeah, I was just along for the ride, that one.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, what we're going to talk about today, we don't have a name for this segment. But we're going to be talking about something that just happened fairly recently before this recording. Now, the recordings are not going to come out in exact order, so we don't know exactly when this is going to come out. But this is something that just happened. Sort of a hot take on a theme. We don't have a name for it. Like I said, we'd be open to any of the listeners coming up with a name for these segments where something happens and then we talk about it, commentary, pretty much right away. So we don't have a specific category for this. But today, Toby, this is something that just happened to you very early in the season. It's something that I think, I know, because we talked about it, hasn't happened to you a lot. No. It was pretty surprising. And it's interesting because it's also something that happened to me pretty recently. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to you now that everyone's calmed down. Or is devastatingly disappointed because they were pulling open Google Maps and getting excited.
Getting ready.
I'm going to throw it back to you and I'll let you start off with what happened.
Yeah, so this was, it just happened to me the other day, and it was interesting, it was strange, it was a bit embarrassing, as you'll see, because it's something I sort of pride myself on not letting happen, but it's something I know that just happens. It has happened to me before, and I've caught it. So I was out fishing, early season bite, throwing red fins, had herring around. Wasn't getting into any big fish yet, but it's a spot that produces some better fish early because we have adult, herring in there. Right. So it's an early season big bait. Why not have some big fish around? And I was getting some hits, and I got a fish. I didn't measure it. I'll call it, 24 inches. So schoolie, no problem. Released it. A couple more casts. Got another one. Released it. That second fish was very energetic. It was one of those ones that if it was the middle of the season, I would have sworn I had a bluefish on. I mean, the thing was shaking, rattling, going crazy on the surface, like just acting kind of insane.
Thrash.
It was going just nuts. And again, I unhooked it, released it, I take a cast, and now I'm a little excited because, over a couple of minutes span, I've had two fish. There's been fish splashing around, and retrieve that cast, nothing. Take a couple more casts, nothing. And I'm like, it so often happens, especially at this spot, is they'll come in waves. So I figured the fish moved out. And as I went to make my next cast, something caught my eye, and I was, let me grab the plug. I swing it into my hand, and there are no hooks on it. Now, I landed two fish. I unhooked that second one. I unhooked the first one, unhooked the second one. The treble hook was in the fish's mouth. It was rigged like all of my red fins with a tail flag, two split rings, and then a 3/0 Mustad 5X treble hook on the belly. So for a good chunk of time, there was a hook and two split rings connected to the plug and to the fish. And somehow they got disconnected, and I didn't notice it for a couple of casts, like I said, which that's where I'm saying it's kind of embarrassing because it's like one of those things that I pride myself on every cast, being ready. I mean, that next cast could be the one where I put whatever I'm throwing in front of the biggest fish of my life. So I try to keep that mentality all the time. I'm gonna, I guess, cover my butt and say, hey, it was early season. I wasn't really expecting anything gigantic yet, but really, it reminded me, like, there's no excuse for that. Even from day one of the season, those first couple of casts, like I tell my son in baseball, you play how you practice. So if you want to call that spring season practice, warm up, shaking off the cobwebs, even if you're going for the better fish, you still should be at 100%. And I wasn't. I mean, for me to notice for a couple of casts that I have no hook on my lure.
That's funny. I mean, I think before I comment on what happened with me, and I have some questions for you after I tell my little short story, I think that is the importance of these early trips. And I was just telling someone this the other day via text message. I was saying that, use your first few trips in the surf as an excuse just to get out and scout, and just say you're scouting. If you're like, it's going to be a waste of gas, they're not going to be here. Even if there are, give yourself an excuse and say, I'm scouting. And then you shake out all that stuff. You flex that muscle. You remember things because, Toby and I, we were just talking about this. We never let off the gas pedal when it comes to the surf. If we're not fishing, we're thinking about it constantly. We're preparing for it constantly. We have a shopping list that's 1,000,000 miles long. There are things in our mind about surf fishing all season long constantly. But for a lot of you listening, I know you lose a little bit of interest during the winter, or at least it fades to the background a bit, and you got to get back out and flex that muscle. And this really points to this. Good for you doing it now and getting that reminder, because 6 weeks from now, you might remember like, you know what? I need to check that leader because I did. And then you do. And then the next fish is 67 pounds or something crazy,
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. On the flip side, I will share my story. This happened to me last August. I was into a hot bite with mullet, and I'd had some decent fish, 20, 25 pounds. And I had a fish that was almost 40. I don't know the order. I think actually it might have happened afterwards, but it doesn't matter. I was into a pretty good bite. And I kept getting hits. Savage, arm shattering, make you feel like the tip of the rod got struck by lightning hits. And I could not hook these fish. And that actually isn't very rare with a glider that I was using. Gliders, they tend to smack them. They're big. The way the hook swings back and forth, all this stuff works against you. And so I didn't think anything of it. I just kept throwing it. And I did not check. And my heart's hammering. I am like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 excitement. Like I am full throttle excited, getting slammed. Finally, I'm like, man, they must be small fish. I'm going to switch to something else. I go to switch to something else. There's no hook and there's no split rings at all. None. It's all gone. And I don't even know when it happened, because when I unhooked my last fish, it was there. So I don't know what happened. I have no idea what happened. But I will point out that this has only rarely happened to me. But in both of our cases, it's with fixed hanger plugs, right? So the redfin and the glider I was using both have fixed hangers. So there's once that edge of that split ring catches that wire, it's easy for it to go all the way out and just keep going. Versus with something like a Super Strike or something like that with a swivel, if it catches it, it can still turn around. You might catch it. So
Yeah. There's no leverage to be had with the swivel.
Exactly. So your excuse was middle of the season, or beginning of the season.
Beginning of the
season, which I think is a solid excuse. My excuse is I turned into a Guggen and an idiot and got too excited like a little kid, and I don't have as good of an excuse. But my question for you, listening to you say this, and I hadn't thought of this before, how often do you check your leader, your snap, and the plug? Like when you're actually fishing? Is it every cast?
It's 98 out of 100 casts. And it's quick. It'll when I'm in the open surf main season, when the lure comes in, if I can see it swimming, that's a start, coming at me. When I go to lift it up out of the water, I'll glance at it, see if I can get any sort of a silhouette to see if there's anything on it. I'll quickly run my hand down the leader to check. And when I do that, I hit the plug. Now I can kind of feel over it real quick to see if there's a hook there, if there's a little bit of weed, if anything anywhere along the equation feels not right, then I give it a little bit more time. Then I'll, okay, hang a second. If all that quick motion, I mean, it's quick. It's like, if nothing's there, it's less than 2 seconds.
Right.
And then I go right into my next cast. If there's something there, then I'll take those few seconds. And I do this on every cast. I especially do it after every fish. I mean, I'll check the leader, whether I'm chunking, whether I'm plugging, jigging, top water, doesn't matter. If I get a fish, I go from actually the braid above the swivel, the knot, the swivel, and I run the full length, maybe 2 or 3 times, and turn. And even, I mean, I'm wearing gloves, so it's not perfect feel, but with the gloves that I use, that you use, you do have enough sensitivity there where you're feeling it, even if it's like on the leader. If it's just rub, if it's not like actual scrapes and little curly Q deals, you could still feel it. And with the leaders, like we talked, I mean, I'm changing it out right away. If the hooks are bad, if there's, if I catch something on there, weed, whatever, I'm cleaning it off, and I'm never sacrificing speed to get back in the water for, lack of 100%. Because like I said, if that next cast could be the fish that I have spent my entire life chasing. And I don't want that excuse or the regret that, dude, if you just checked it, like, let something else go wrong in the equation.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I feel like that's in
the spring,
we're going to come back to for sure.
Yeah. Like this time of year when this occurred, I'm not as concerned. I'm not, as you see, as I proved, I'm not checking it as often because, again, if I'm using let's just say on the leader, if I'm running 40-pound leader material and I'm catching 24-inch fish, I think it'd be 3/4 of the way through and it's still fine.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I'm not as concerned. I look more in that time of year for weeds, just because it's going to completely ruin the effectiveness of the lure, obviously.
Yeah.
And I guess now I got to add in, make sure there's a hook there.
That's right.
A question back to you on yours, and I'll say what was going on with mine and say with how yours was rigged. Again, we had solid hangers.
Yep.
The hanger didn't get ripped out of my plug. I've had that happen on redfins. That's a whole other story.
Yep.
But then I had 2 split rings.
Yep.
So it's hanger, split ring, hook, to give a little, to give it a little more drop back. B, it does afford a little bit more spin when you got a fish on there, so it doesn't torque. Is that how's yours rigged up?
Yeah, that's exactly how mine was rigged up on those gliders in particular. Exactly the same. And in this particular case, I'm using pretty big. Oh boy, now I'm going to be tested because can I come up with the number of this Rasco split ring that I was using? They were at least 6.5s. 6.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have a pack right here on my desk. I have it, and it's got a big, permanent marker at 6.5H.
6.5H's, I think, was the ones that I'm using.
Probably,
Those are the largest ones I use. I use a lot of 5.5s and 5s, depending on 5 to 7 is the ones I have, and I 5.5. There's the H's, etc. But I think 6.5H's are the ones that I'm using on there specifically.
Yeah, I think those are like the standard heavy duty.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm not mistaken, Super Strike, their heavy split rings are those, and that's why I originally went to these when I was playing with. Again, here's another. I'm going to throw it out there. Talk for another day. Split rings. When I was playing around with different split rings and Wolverines and everything else, and I've been on these for years.
Yeah, they're cheap and they work great. I also, listening to you, I think, despite what I just said about, missing that hook, that for me is a pretty rare circumstance. I know people listening to this are like, yeah, you're just saying that for the podcast and you just prove that you don't do this, but I think that I probably also check 99.5 out of 100 casts. Like, I really do, check a lot. And I fished last night, and I'm thinking about it. I picked up a little bit of weed on one cast. And in that particular case, maybe, again, it's early season, and my level of, worry or meticulousness is potentially a lot less. But when that happened, I picked up that little piece of mungy weed. I started being super meticulous on checking every single cast, running my hand all the way down, and it was pretty dark. And what I do is I'll actually hold. I'm picturing this with the Super Strike darter because this happened a few times because of where it was swimming in the water column. I'm holding it so close to my face that it's just about touching my nose. And I have extremely good vision. This is like one of my only good senses I have because my hearing isn't so great. I got no sense of smell. And I have good eyesight, but I got that freaking thing because I don't want to turn on my light. I will not turn on my light. So I'm holding it right up against my nose, and I'm picking out the tiniest little pieces of mung from the knot on the tactical angler's clip. Like, that's what I'm doing because I'm being that meticulous, and I'm running my fingers up and down that leader. And I think that this is something that a lot of anglers don't do enough. If you are someone who is making 25 casts and not checking, you're doing something wrong. 100%. If you are someone who takes 10 casts and doesn't check and you fish a sand beach and the water's clean and you didn't catch anything, okay, I'll buy it. You know, I still wouldn't do it personally, but I understand the reasoning. But if you're spending that much time, you're doing something wrong. And Toby, I'll throw this back to you before we end the episode, but I have someone I fish with, and he went an entire night fishing Gibbs Danny with the hook protectors on. And that is insane. And he was losing fish. That, to me, is insane. Like, that is, if you think there's ever been a moment where that was you, you got to change. It's your whole focus, your whole season now is to just not do that. What do you think? What do you think, Toby? Fair?
Yeah, and I hate to one-up that story, but it's quick.
Okay.
When the Yozuri crystal minnow first hit the market, so, I mean, this was
10, anyways. Maybe
it was in
15.
the 90s. I think it was late 90s range.
Okay. So 30 years ago.
Yeah, late 90s, 2000, somewhere. It doesn't matter exactly, but it was when it first had come out, and it was like, oh my God, this new plug, you know, this is the thing. And I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he was fishing them a bunch, and he's like, you know, we're fishing them, talking about it, and he's like, you're never going to guess what a friend of mine just did up on the Cape. I'm like, oh, okay. He bought a bunch of these, took them out of the package, clipped them on, was fishing them, was getting hits, couldn't catch anything. Well, if you know on the Yozuris, they take the little twist tie and hold the hooks together.
Oh,
he actually had left that on. So, like, one hook was going forward, you know, that was facing right, but the back hook was facing the wrong direction. So he must have just been getting all these short hits from little fish and couldn't hook them. And I don't remember exactly how long into the session he went fishing it that way, but he was actually fishing it out the package with the twist tie thing on there still. So he really, and he knows better, so he really wasn't checking his stuff.
Oh my God. Well, I feel like that's a good spot to leave it because my brain and heart cannot handle this anymore. That is insane. You definitely taught me, Toby. That is a story topper. I don't even know where we go from there. So I guess, guys, we will see you on the next edition of the Surfcast Podcast. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at the Surfcast Podcast.